The riverbeds had dried completely, leaving nothing but cracked earth where water once flowed freely through the savanna. Hippos, forced from their usual habitats by the relentless drought, began wandering into nearby villages in search of food and water. Residents were stunned as massive bodies moved through streets and courtyards, creatures usually seen only in wild rivers now among homes. Children and adults alike froze in both fear and awe at the sight of such powerful animals navigating the human landscape. The relentless sun had created desperation in both humans and wildlife, turning everyday life into a tense battle for survival. Like and subscribe to discover more unbelievable stories where nature pushes creatures beyond their boundaries and humans to the edge. Farmers watched helplessly as gardens and crops were trampled by the giant beasts seeking anything edible. Authorities tried to intervene, using barriers and loud noises, but the hippos were relentless and driven by thirst and hunger. Experts later explained how climate change and prolonged droughts are increasingly forcing wild animals into human settlements. That day became a lesson in survival, coexistence, and the unpredictable ways nature can disrupt human life. 1. The drought begins. The sun blazed relentlessly, drying rivers and lakes, leaving water sources scarce for all creatures. Villagers watched anxiously as the riverbeds cracked and mud pools shrank to a few stagnant patches. Hippos, desperate for water, began wandering from their usual habitats, searching for sustenance nearby. The drought stretched for months, with no rainfall to replenish rivers, ponds, or drinking water for animals. Crops failed under the scorching heat, and villagers faced food shortages alongside wildlife suffering. The heat caused tension, as humans and animals alike competed for the remaining life-giving water. Hippos, usually confined to rivers, became bold in their search for water, approaching village boundaries. Communities noticed unusual activity near fields and roads, warning that wildlife was venturing closer. The ecosystem was disrupted, as predators and herbivores alike struggled to survive under extreme conditions. Villagers began preparing for the worst, knowing that desperation could drive dangerous encounters inland. Daily life was interrupted, as villagers rationed water and monitored animal movements cautiously. Children were warned to stay away from riverbeds, which were now crowded with starving hippos. The drought's severity left everyone anxious, knowing that human-animal conflicts were becoming inevitable. Even wildlife experts expressed concern, predicting that forced migration could cause accidents and injuries. The lack of rainfall had turned once thriving rivers into treacherous dry corridors full of tension. Farmers feared that hippos entering farmland could destroy crops and harm both livestock and people. The landscape had transformed, with dry plains and shrinking waterholes leaving no sanctuary for wildlife. 2. Hippos enter villages. Hippos began straying into villages, seeking water from wells, ponds, and irrigation channels. Their massive bodies crushed fences and crops, leaving destruction in areas previously untouched by wildlife. Villagers were terrified, knowing the animals could be lethal if provoked or startled. Children watched from windows, wide-eyed, as hippos wandered through streets in search of water. Farmers abandoned fields temporarily, fearing encounters with these desperate giants near their homes. Even domestic animals were cautious, hiding as hippos approached homes and water sources. Hippos drank from shallow wells, overturning containers and breaking structures in the process. Villagers tried to keep a safe distance, understanding that these animals were dangerous despite their calm appearance. The community realized that the drought had forced nature into conflict with human survival strategies. Authorities urged caution, warning that any sudden movements could provoke aggressive responses. Hippos disrupted daily life, making travel, farming, and outdoor activities extremely risky. People adapted by moving livestock and securing belongings away from floodable areas or animal paths. The intrusion was unprecedented, as hippos rarely approached human settlements under normal conditions. Villagers documented sightings, learning patterns of movement to predict where animals might appear next. Water points became dangerous zones, attracting both hippos and humans competing for survival. 3. Damage to crops. Fields of maize, sorghum, and cassava were trampled as hippos sought water or wandered aimlessly. Farmers faced devastating losses, as stalks were crushed and irrigation channels destroyed in minutes. Even crops far from riverbanks were not safe, as hippos roamed widely searching for hydration. The destruction of farmland threatened both local food supply and villagers' livelihoods significantly. Villagers tried to build barriers, but the sheer size and strength of hippos rendered most ineffective. Fences were torn apart, gates broken, and protective measures overturned under the weight of giants. Children were instructed not to play near fields, which had become unpredictable and hazardous zones. Livestock suffered as well, with goats and sheep startled or injured by hippos moving through grazing areas. Farmers documented losses, hoping that emergency aid could be secured for immediate food shortages. The crop damage added economic strain to already stressed households during the severe drought. Every day, hippos visited fields in search of mud pools or remaining water, increasing repeated damage. Villagers tried to herd hippos away using noise and lights, but the animals ignored threats in desperation. Soil compacted by the weight of hippos made replanting more difficult and delayed agricultural recovery. Flooded irrigation systems were sabotaged unintentionally as hippos stomped through channels and ditches. The loss of crops forced families to rely on stored grains, which were often insufficient for survival. Damage extended beyond food crops to fruit orchards and vegetable gardens, leaving little unscathed. 4. Safety measures implemented. Villagers created watch teams to monitor hippos approaching villages during day and night. Early warning systems were improvised, including drums, whistles, and signaling lights to alert residents. Temporary barriers were built using logs, sandbags, and fences to deter animals from entering homes. Children and elderly were kept indoors, reducing the risk of dangerous encounters in streets or fields. Authorities advised villagers to avoid confronting hippos directly, emphasizing observation from a distance. Farmers adapted by moving crops and livestock to areas less accessible to wandering animals. Villagers were trained to identify signs of aggression, including grunts, yawns, and territorial behaviors. Community meetings educated people on how to coexist safely with hippos during prolonged drought. Even water collection points were monitored, with teams ensuring humans could access water safely. Residents shared responsibilities, rotating patrols and surveillance to cover larger areas effectively. Evacuation plans were discussed in case hippos became aggressive or conditions worsened suddenly. People improvised shelters using raised platforms and barricades to avoid ground-level encounters. Noise deterrents and fire torches were used cautiously to guide hippos away from densely populated areas. Villagers remained vigilant at night, aware that hippos could travel quietly and unexpectedly during darkness. Coordination with wildlife experts helped anticipate hippo movements and prevent injuries to humans. Temporary safe zones were designated where families could gather if hippos approached aggressively. 5. Human-hippo encounters. Despite precautions, encounters between humans and hippos were frequent and sometimes dangerous. People reported near misses in streets, near wells, and around vegetable gardens destroyed by the animals. Children were often the most at risk, prompting families to reinforce supervision and restrict outdoor activities. Hippos occasionally displayed aggression, chasing villagers who unknowingly entered their path during the search for water. The animals were unpredictable, driven by thirst and hunger rather than normal behavioral patterns. Families learned quickly to identify warning signs and avoid triggering defensive responses. Market visits were limited, as hippos sometimes wandered into public spaces, making normal routines hazardous. Even well-trained adults experienced fear when confronted by the sheer size and power of the animals. Encounters highlighted the importance of distance, calm movement, and understanding hippo behavior. Villagers developed hand signals and visual cues to warn neighbors of hippo proximity without causing panic. Local leaders emphasized that survival depended on patience and caution during human-wildlife interactions. Rescue or removal operations were carefully coordinated, reducing risks during encounters in villages. 6. Nighttime panic. At night, hippos moved silently through streets, creating fear among villagers trying to rest safely at home. Families stayed awake, listening for splashes or grunts, alert to any approaching danger during darkness. Children huddled with parents, afraid to move even within their homes in case hippos entered the yard. Dogs barked and ran frantically, sensing the presence of massive animals moving nearby with stealth. Even cautious adults felt tension, knowing a startled hippo could charge violently without warning. Rooftops and upper floors became temporary refuges for families with smaller children during the night. Villagers improvised barriers using furniture, water barrels, and debris to prevent animals from entering homes. Noise from hippos splashing in shallow pools often woke entire neighborhoods, keeping residents alert. Patrol teams walked silently with torches to guide hippos back toward water sources and away from homes. Nighttime became a high-risk period, requiring constant vigilance to avoid dangerous human-animal encounters. Families shared watch duties in shifts, allowing some rest while others monitored for approaching hippos. The fear of nocturnal movement created lasting stress, affecting sleep patterns and daily life routines. 7. Emergency response teams, local authorities, and wildlife experts collaborated to manage hippos and protect residents from harm. Rescue teams monitored movement patterns, using GPS and observation to predict animal behavior accurately. Temporary shelters were established in safe zones to relocate families if hippos became aggressive. Veterinarians assessed hippo health, providing guidance to prevent animal fatalities during displacement. Patrols worked in shifts, ensuring that the entire village remained under constant surveillance. Teams provided food and water for displaced people, reducing the need for risky trips into danger zones. Barriers and diversion channels were reinforced to guide hippos away from homes and public areas. Volunteers coordinated with authorities to alert residents of hippo movements in real time using loudspeakers. Medical teams remained on standby, ready to treat injuries caused by accidental encounters. Coordination between departments ensured rapid response to both human and animal emergencies. Authorities distributed instructions for families, emphasizing non-confrontational and safe behaviors. Emergency communication lines were maintained, including radios and mobile alerts for remote areas. Teams worked tirelessly, often through extreme heat, to prevent further loss of life and property. Collaborative efforts allowed for strategic placement of temporary water sources to lure hippos away. Volunteers learned basic wildlife management techniques under guidance of experts on site. 8. Damage to infrastructure. Hippos caused significant damage to roads, bridges, and fences as they moved through villages in search of water. Crushed gates and broken walls created hazards, making travel and access to homes dangerous for residents. Irrigation channels were destroyed, impacting remaining crops and limiting water distribution for human use. Electric poles and water pumps were occasionally toppled by the strength of roaming hippos. Temporary shelters were damaged, forcing families to repair structures quickly to maintain safety. Paths and streets were blocked by debris and animal tracks, slowing emergency response and rescue efforts. Communities improvised repairs, using sandbags, logs, and stones to prevent further structural collapse. Even schools and clinics faced minor damage, disrupting daily activities and access to essential services. Residents collaborated to rebuild fences and barriers, prioritizing areas where hippos frequently passed. Water supply systems were vulnerable, with pumps and wells exposed to accidental destruction. Road repair teams faced challenges navigating mud, debris, and the tracks of massive animals. Local governments assessed long-term infrastructure needs to prevent repeated damage during droughts. Electricity restoration was delayed in areas damaged by hippo movement and collapsing poles. Residents documented damage for aid requests, highlighting the scale of destruction caused by wildlife. Repairing infrastructure became a collective task, involving families, volunteers, and local authorities. 9. Community cooperation. Villagers organized committees to share responsibilities and ensure safety during the drought crisis. Neighbors assisted each other in building temporary barriers, securing water, and monitoring hippos. Families pooled resources, including food, water, and labor, to protect homes and vulnerable members. Shared watch shifts allowed constant vigilance, ensuring early warning of approaching animals. Community members helped relocate livestock and protect essential supplies from damage. Communication networks were strengthened, using signals, horns, and visual alerts to warn residents. Collective efforts created a sense of unity and resilience, helping people cope with prolonged stress. Youth groups contributed energy and creativity to design barriers, observation posts, and patrol routes. Neighbors shared food and water with the most affected households, preventing immediate hunger crises. Community members documented sightings and incidents, aiding strategic planning for safety measures. Children learned teamwork and responsibility through participation in monitoring and support activities. 10. Water scarcity. The drought created severe water scarcity, affecting humans, livestock, and wildlife simultaneously. Villagers rationed remaining water carefully, prioritizing drinking and essential household uses. Hippos competed for stagnant pools, often driving humans away from makeshift water sources. Communities dug temporary wells and reservoirs to provide safe drinking water amidst widespread dryness. Children carried water from distant sources under supervision to avoid dangerous encounters with animals. Water scarcity intensified tensions, as each drop became vital for survival for all living beings. Rainfall remained absent for weeks, deepening the crisis and pushing hippos further into villages. Public health campaigns emphasized hygiene practices to prevent illness during limited water availability. Authorities coordinated delivery of water through trucks, ensuring vulnerable households were served. Local leaders encouraged cooperation in sharing water to prevent conflicts and maintain safety. Water points became gathering areas, requiring careful management to avoid overcrowding and danger. Villagers used rationing schedules to balance consumption and reduce waste in extreme heat. Even temporary pools created for hippos posed a hazard if humans attempted to access them simultaneously. Communities explored rainwater harvesting techniques to prepare for future scarcity and resilience. Daily routines were adjusted, limiting non-essential water use and prioritizing hydration for families. 11. Livestock threats. Hippos entering villages endangered livestock, crushing pens and chasing animals in search of water. Cattle, goats, and sheep were often frightened, leading to injuries or death during panicked escapes. Farmers built temporary enclosures, but hippos destroyed fences and caused repeated damage to pens. Even small animals like chickens and ducks were at risk from the presence of wandering hippos. Villagers relocated livestock to safer areas, sometimes traveling long distances to avoid dangerous zones. Nighttime movements were particularly risky, as animals could be attacked by hippos moving through villages. Families worked together, taking shifts to guard livestock and prevent animals from wandering into hippo paths. Animals injured during encounters required medical attention, adding stress and financial burden to households. Children helped by carrying food and water to secure areas, learning responsibility during the crisis. Veterinarians were called in to treat injured livestock and advise on temporary safety measures. Communities coordinated relocation of animals to high grounds or sheltered zones safe from hippos. Even temporary pens needed constant monitoring, as hippos often returned unexpectedly during night or day. Farmers adapted quickly, constructing reinforced fences with logs, stones, and metal bars wherever possible. The threat to livestock highlighted the wider impact of drought on human survival and food security. Every damaged pen or lost animal created economic and emotional stress for affected families. 12. Crop protection strategies. Farmers experimented with barriers, trenches, and noise deterrents to protect remaining crops from hippos. Some used elevated platforms and temporary walls to prevent animals from trampling seedlings and plants. Nighttime patrols monitored fields, alerting families when hippos approached agricultural areas. Communities shared resources and techniques, learning which methods were most effective in real situations. Natural deterrents, including chili sprays and sound devices, were applied to discourage hippo entry. Villagers reinforced irrigation channels, protecting water access without inviting animals into fields. Crop rotation and alternative planting locations were considered to minimize exposure to wandering hippos. Temporary fencing was combined with community watch schedules for constant vigilance over farmland. Even simple strategies, like planting dense vegetation around fields, helped deter animal intrusions. Farmers coordinated planting schedules to maximize safety and reduce loss from animal interference. Local authorities provided guidance on sustainable and low-cost crop protection measures. Monitoring patterns of hippo movement allowed villagers to predict which fields were at highest risk. Collaboration among farmers led to shared knowledge and effective strategies for protecting livelihoods. Every successful protection method became a community lesson in managing human-wildlife conflict. Crop protection became a critical part of survival, balancing food security and safety during drought. Even minor successes boosted morale, motivating residents to continue defensive efforts persistently. Barriers, patrols, and deterrents evolved over time, adapting to changing hippo behavior and drought conditions. 13. Disease risk. Stagnant water left by the drought created conditions for disease among humans, livestock, and wildlife. Mosquito-borne illnesses increased as hippo pools and small puddles became breeding grounds. Villagers were warned to boil water, use repellents, and maintain hygiene despite limited resources. Veterinary teams monitored livestock for infections caused by contaminated water or injuries from hippos. Flooded or trampled areas led to exposure to bacteria, increasing risk of illness among children and adults. Medical teams provided vaccinations and first aid, prioritizing those most vulnerable in the community. Public health campaigns educated residents on preventing infection and recognizing early warning signs. Temporary clinics were established to treat minor injuries and waterborne illnesses promptly. Displaced wildlife, including hippos, contributed indirectly to disease transmission in shared water sources. Villagers cleaned debris and mud from homes and streets to reduce bacterial contamination risks. Handwashing and sanitation practices were emphasized, especially when water scarcity limited hygiene options. Families were encouraged to separate drinking water from animal access points wherever possible. 14. Psychological stress. The drought caused immense psychological stress among villagers facing constant danger from hippos. Children feared leaving homes, and adults experienced anxiety from ongoing threats to safety and livelihood. Nighttime encounters with hippos intensified panic, disrupting sleep patterns and increasing mental strain. Counselors and elders provided support, teaching coping strategies and stress management techniques. Community gatherings allowed residents to share experiences, easing fear and building mutual support. Daily uncertainty created tension in households, with every approaching splash or grunt triggering alarm. Fear of losing livestock or crops added emotional burden to the already stressful environment. Patrols and safety measures helped reduce stress by providing some control over dangerous circumstances. Families learned to maintain routines and adapt to changing conditions, strengthening resilience gradually. Children participated in educational activities to understand the drought and wildlife behaviors safely. Sharing stories and experiences allowed individuals to process trauma collectively and reduce isolation. 15. Water provision solutions. Authorities created temporary waterholes to divert hippos away from human settlements safely. Trucks delivered potable water to affected villages, ensuring people had access despite scarcity. Communities dug additional wells in safe zones to provide alternative drinking sources for humans. Rainwater harvesting methods were introduced to store water for future needs during prolonged drought. Temporary dams and ponds were constructed to provide water to both humans and wildlife without conflict. Villagers were taught to purify water and maintain hygiene when sources were limited or shared. Water rationing schedules were implemented to ensure fair distribution among households and communities. Emergency storage tanks were installed in schools, clinics, and community centers for collective use. Efforts focused on sustainability, balancing immediate human needs with minimizing harm to wildlife. Coordination with wildlife experts allowed hippos access to water without threatening residents. Families collected and stored water daily, learning to plan consumption carefully to avoid shortages. Community participation ensured that water distribution points were safe and organized effectively. Diversion strategies guided hippos toward rivers, reducing risk of entering populated areas. Temporary irrigation channels were maintained to supply remaining crops without attracting hippos. Monitoring ensured that water sources remained safe from contamination while serving both humans and animals. 16. Long-term environmental damage. Drought and hippo movements caused long-term environmental damage to vegetation and soil. Uprooted trees and destroyed plants reduced shade and shelter for both humans and wildlife. Soil compaction from hippos made replanting crops difficult, slowing agricultural recovery. Erosion increased along riverbanks and open fields, creating further challenges for farming and water management. Displaced wildlife disrupted local ecosystems, altering predator-prey balance and plant regeneration. Communities planted new trees and vegetation to stabilize soil and restore ecological balance gradually. Wetlands and waterholes were cleared of debris to improve water flow and prevent future stagnation. Environmental monitoring was conducted to assess long-term recovery needs and wildlife return. Villagers learned that human activity and wildlife survival must be balanced to prevent further degradation. Efforts to restore vegetation and maintain habitats help sustain local biodiversity for future seasons. Farmers adopted sustainable practices, including crop rotation and soil preservation techniques. The drought highlighted the delicate relationship between human settlements and surrounding ecosystems. Wildlife corridors were maintained to allow safe animal movement back to natural habitats. Every restoration effort contributed to resilience against future droughts and extreme weather events. Communities observed gradual regrowth, taking pride in participating in environmental recovery. Education campaigns taught children the importance of environmental stewardship for survival. 17. Media attention. News outlets reported the unusual sight of hippos roaming villages due to extreme drought conditions. Photographs and videos spread quickly, attracting attention from around the world. Journalists interviewed villagers, capturing stories of survival, fear, and resilience during the crisis. Media coverage helped highlight the severity of drought impacts on both humans and wildlife. Experts were consulted, explaining the reasons behind hippos' unusual migration inland. Stories emphasized human-animal conflict while showcasing the community's innovative responses. Children appeared in reports, sharing experiences of witnessing hippos up close in their neighborhoods. Media attention brought donations and support from organizations to assist affected communities. Documentaries captured the interaction between humans, hippos, and the harsh environmental conditions. Global attention highlighted the urgent need for sustainable water management and disaster preparedness. Social media amplified the story, prompting awareness campaigns about climate impacts on wildlife. Villagers became advocates for both human safety and wildlife protection through interviews and reporting. Footage of hippos navigating streets underscored the scale of the crisis in visual terms. Experts used media coverage to educate audiences on drought prevention and wildlife behavior. Reports highlighted successful community strategies for coexistence, inspiring similar initiatives elsewhere. 18. Cultural impact. The unusual arrival of hippos into villages became a topic of local folklore and storytelling. Children created drawings and stories depicting giant animals wandering streets during drought. Villagers performed traditional songs and dances to honor the resilience of both people and wildlife. Community leaders used stories to teach lessons about cooperation, patience, and survival under stress. Religious ceremonies incorporated prayers for rain and protection from further disasters. Festivals adapted to acknowledge human-animal encounters, fostering awareness and respect for wildlife. Local artists captured scenes of hippos in unexpected settings, preserving memories visually. Storytelling sessions educated children about dangers while celebrating the community's resilience. Elders shared experiences from past environmental challenges, connecting generations through shared knowledge. Cultural rituals provided comfort and strengthened social bonds during prolonged periods of uncertainty. Folklore emphasized moral lessons, including respect for nature and the consequences of environmental neglect. Songs and dances became a way to process fear and anxiety collectively within the community. Local schools incorporated lessons about the event, teaching environmental science through real-life experience. Children learned empathy and awareness of wildlife behavior through cultural narratives and activities. 19. Wildlife behavior study. Experts observed hippos' unusual inland behavior to understand the effects of extreme drought. Movement patterns were tracked to determine how water scarcity influenced migration and territory shifts. Behavioral changes included increased aggression, nocturnal roaming, and risk-taking in human areas. Data collected helped scientists predict future wildlife responses to droughts and climate stress. Interactions between hippos and humans were analyzed for safety and coexistence strategies. Dietary adaptations were observed, with hippos consuming vegetation outside their usual river habitats. Social structures within hippo groups changed due to stress and scarcity of resources. Scientists documented stress indicators in hippos, including weight loss and behavioral aggression. Monitoring provided insight into ecosystem resilience and the cascading effects of drought on wildlife. Findings were shared with local authorities to guide safer management of displaced animals. Environmentalists studied the impact on other species dependent on rivers and wetlands. Knowledge gained informed global strategies for protecting wildlife during extreme weather events. Observation helped communities prepare for future interactions with wildlife under resource scarcity. Researchers noted recovery patterns after rainfall, tracking return to natural habitats and behaviors. Hippo migration became a case study in animal adaptability and survival under environmental stress. The research highlighted the interconnectedness of human survival, wildlife, and environmental stability. Villagers participated in data collection, learning observation techniques and animal behavior basics. Studies emphasized prevention, planning, and education to reduce conflicts during future droughts. Wildlife behavior studies reinforced the need for sustainable water and habitat management strategies. The drought provided a unique opportunity to learn about animal resilience and adaptation under pressure. 20. Lessons learned. The drought taught villagers vital lessons about preparedness, adaptation, and coexistence with wildlife. Emergency plans were created, including safe zones, evacuation routes, and watch schedules for humans. Families learned to ration water and food while prioritizing safety for both humans and livestock. Community cooperation was essential for survival, emphasizing communication, patience, and teamwork. Sustainable farming and environmental practices were adopted to reduce future vulnerability. Children were educated about wildlife behavior, drought impact, and strategies to prevent conflicts. Early warning systems and monitoring were established to predict animal movements during crises. Psychological support and community bonding became critical elements for coping with extreme stress. Documentation of experiences ensured knowledge transfer for future generations facing similar challenges. Lessons included understanding the interdependence between humans, wildlife, and the environment. Communities recognized the importance of adaptation, resilience, and innovative problem solving. Authorities collaborated with residents to ensure safety measures and disaster preparedness plans. Water conservation, crop protection, and livestock management became integrated into daily life. Cultural practices evolved to include awareness, education, and storytelling for resilience building. Environmental restoration projects were undertaken to rehabilitate land damaged during the drought. Continuous vigilance became a norm, with communities prepared for sudden environmental changes. Every challenge faced reinforced the importance of empathy, cooperation, and strategic thinking. The experience inspired long-term planning for disasters and sustainable resource management. Villagers emerged stronger, wiser, and more prepared to coexist with wildlife under challenging conditions. The drought left scars but also knowledge, ensuring survival and resilience for generations to come. By nightfall, villagers and rescue teams worked together to guide the hippos back toward safer riverbeds and wetlands. The drought had left scars on the land, but it also created a moment of awe and respect for the power of wildlife. Scientists studied the behavior to prevent similar incidents and to understand the effects of extreme weather on animal movement. Communities realized the importance of preparedness, both for human safety and for protecting wildlife in times of crisis. Like and subscribe to follow more astonishing true stories where nature challenges humans in unimaginable ways. Comment below with your thoughts on how people and wildlife can coexist during severe climate events. The image of massive hippos wandering through villages will remain etched in local memory forever. It reminded everyone that even the strongest human settlements are vulnerable to the forces of nature. Extreme events like this teach lessons about resilience, respect, and the fragile balance of our ecosystems. Thank you for watching and staying with us as we share this remarkable story of survival and adaptation.